Hi, everybody. We have a great crowd. I'm Barry Friedman, and I teach law here. Was here at the beginning of the forum and haven't been back in a while. We are here to talk about David Lat's very wonderful book, Supreme Ambitions. I'm going to introduce David to you, and then I'm going to introduce Judge Nathan to you, who I might slip and call Allie at some point, so forgive me. Don't bench slap me. And to use one of David's phrases. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book, because I know not everybody has read it. I feel like I have a lot of volume and reverb here, if it's possible for me to have less. We have copies of the book that we have raffled off, and I have the list, which I will read at the end. I happen to know a number of these folks, so one should not believe that I manipulated the lottery, but I maybe did a little. And David has agreed to sign other books, so we'll do that at the end. So to my left is David Lat. David went to Harvard and then Yale. I wouldn't stress all this, but it seems to be such a theme in the book. And then clerked on the Ninth Circuit for Judge O'Scanlan. He returned to New York to practice law at Wachtell, Lipton. He'd had enough of that and went to be a prosecutor in the, I have to say, of all the things I know about you, this is the most surprising, but to be a prosecutor in the District of New Jersey. But he had a secret life at the time, and I was a follower of that secret life, which is that he was Article III groupie, a young woman associate at a law firm who was overly enamored, perhaps, if one could be overly enamored of the federal bench, who they were, what they wore underneath their robes, that was the name of the blog, who they were hiring, who was going to clerk where, all about the elect, people to go clerk at the Supreme Court of the United States. And David eventually outed himself and then moved on to a glorious blogging career at Above the Law. And I have to say that David has, in ways intended and unintended, affected a great deal that we all do in law schools and the law. So David, it's always wonderful to have you here, and I thank you. To my right is Judge Alison Nathan. I noticed you're Alison Nathan on the placard. Usually it's honorable, but so I hope that doesn't mean you're dishonorable. But Judge
We'll let the room decide.
We'll decide at the end. We'll
Okay,
have a ballot.
we'll do that.
Judge Nathan went to Cornell and then also clerked on the Ninth Circuit, I guess the year before, David? The year after, for Judge Fletcher. Then she clerked for John Paul Stevens. She practiced on the Supreme Court. She practiced law for 4 years, 5 years, roughly. And then headed toward a noble career. So she was a visiting assistant professor at Fordham. She was a fellow here. We all thought she was going to be an academic star, but instead she went to the White House counsel's office. Then she was a special assistant to the Solicitor General of New York, and in 2011 was elevated to the federal bench. And as we all were observing earlier, might have been one of the last individuals that was nominated and appointed to the federal bench. So we live in interesting times. So instead of talking about the real world, we're going to talk about fiction, though it may cross over. So Supreme Ambitions is the story of two Asian American women, one with the Philippine heritage and one with the Chinese heritage. One is named Audrey Coyne, and the other is Christina Wong Stinson, and they have a great deal in common, so I'll let you hear about that through Audrey's words. She said, "I was struck by the similarities in our backgrounds. We were both biracial women. We both grew up without much money. We both had mothers who were nurses' aides. After doing well in college, we both went straight through to law school. But there was a substantial difference between the two of them, which was that Audrey Coyne was a law student who was applying to clerk for Judge Stinson, and yet there was one unbelievably important similarity that they shared, which Audrey explained to the judge at her interview. At a moment when she thought maybe it wasn't going great, she said, "Judge Stinson, I'm you. I'm smart, I'm ambitious, and I'm relentless." Sounds a lot like my daughter, I have to admit. And not because of me pushing her. "I came up from a humble background and made something of myself. Some people underestimate me. They expect me, as an Asian American woman from modest means, to be some sort of a wallflower. But then I prove them wrong, big time." Now, I want to come back to ambition, but before I do, I just want to tell you, the book is full of people that we know. So there is a Judge Sherwin Lin on the California Supreme Court, who I assume is Goodwin Liu. There are justices on the Supreme Court, Justice Hannah Greenberg, the notorious RBG, Justice Aidan Keegan, Justice Scalia, who has just passed away, a fact about which we're all very sad. There's Judge, I think, Marta Salas Deleuze, who I think is Martha Burzon, but I'm not sure. There is Judge Frank Polanski, who is definitely Alex Kaczynski. And there's even a Judge, Amanda Nathanson, who actually cannot be Judge Nathan because there are two key cases that play a role in this book. One is an immigration case, and one is a case that is very much Hollingsworth versus Perry, but called Geithner in the book. And that was not decided by Judge Nathan, as best as I know, unless there were strings being pulled somewhere of which I'm unaware. So we want to talk about all kinds of things today. We want to talk about ambition. We want to talk about clerkships. We want to talk about legal careers. We want to talk about love in the law. I'd like to talk about stereotypes, of which there are many in the book. I'd like to talk about judges, both before and behind their backs, and how we treat judges. I think I might even want to talk about attire because, and this is one of the things that jumped out at me in the book, which is where David says, well, David doesn't say it, one of his characters does, but he says, as I had guessed from her frumpy attire, she had gone to Harvard Law School. So we may want to talk about how NYU law students dress. But I want to start, so this is Judge Stimson talking to Audrey. She says, you're an improbable person, Audrey, but so am I. We have that in common, insatiable ambition. So the book is called Supreme Ambitions because, as you might have guessed by now, they both had an ambition to make their way to the Supreme Court. One is a law clerk and one is a justice. And so I just want to start by asking you, David, and Judge Nathan, if I ignore you for too much here at the front, you just loudly or something.
I'll bang my gavel.
Yeah, bang your gavel, and then I will pay you the due that judges deserve. So I will immediately pivot mid-sentence and answer whatever question you have. So why ambition? You know, of all the things you could have talked about in the law, why ambition? And of the many things I got out of the book, I was left not sure whether ambition was a good or a bad thing. So.
Well, I think that ambition is, in some ways, one of the great themes of literature. If you look at epics of war, or you look at tales of people who start from modest means and try to achieve political or economic power, ambition is a theme that is really quite universal. I think it has special resonance in the legal profession because we may try to hide it to varying degrees, but law students and lawyers are very ambitious people. People have, I think, in our profession, a desire for better or worse to achieve, to reach some high place, to go to a law school like NYU, to clerk for a federal judge, to make partner at a law firm, to be appointed to the federal bench. This is something that really, for better or worse, runs in our veins, I think, as lawyers and law students. And one of the questions I think the book poses, which is a question that many of you will, in the course of your own careers, have to answer for yourselves, is when is enough enough? You think, okay, I got into a great college. Well, that's great. My life is great. Oh, no, but now I have to get into a great law school. Oh, well, I get into a great law school. Now everything is great. Oh, no, wait, no. There's this thing called on-campus interviewing and recruiting. Oh, well, I got a great job at a firm. Oh, now I'm set for life. Oh, no, wait, now I have to clerk, or now I have to make partner. And so there's this sense of just always being on this treadmill in the legal profession. And I think one of the questions the book poses is it okay to step off the treadmill, or is that a cop-out? And so to the extent that Professor Friedman is ambivalent about ambition, I like to think I've done my job because I wasn't trying to write a book that was going to give a message like ambition is always good or ambition is always bad. I wanted to capture both the good and bad things about it. The things that can make ambition spur us to achievement, to help make the world a better place, and the things about ambition that are corrosive and toxic. So I really tried to explore both of these in the guise of this book.
So I guess two questions I'll fold into one that follow from that. So it seems to me from reading the book that there's an inverse relationship between ambition and happiness. That the ambition that people have, I think, you can correct me, it's your book, but the ambition that people have does not seem to make them happy. And at the same time, you just alluded to, sort of my next question in this vein, which is it okay to get off the treadmill? none of us seem to be able to hold down a job these days. Actually, I've been a law professor for 30-some years now, so maybe I can. But, you know, is it okay to step off the treadmill? So I'm curious about the inverse proportion, and then, you know, if the answer to that is just sort of letting your ambition go.
Well, easier said than done. I think that is one possible answer to this puzzle, to just say, oh, well, I'm just going to let ambition go. But if you do that, I think you will feel these pangs when you read about people who were your contemporaries who are going on to do these amazing things. And to be totally honest, it might eat at you. So it's easier to say to let go of it than to just let go of it. If you wanted to let go of it, well, you know, this room would be empty. All could be at the beach or something. So it's, I think, a lot harder to do than it is. In terms of the relationship between ambition and happiness, that's a very complicated question. I think that there are some very ambitious and successful people who are happy, who have managed to control and use ambition as a force for good in their lives. And then there are other people who you would think, from looking at them on the outside, must be so, so happy. And yet, despite all of their achievement on very superficial measures, or maybe not so superficial measures, they are deeply, deeply unhappy. So it's so hard to say.
Well, so, and then I'm going to turn to Judge Nathan, who I've just decided I'm going to call Allie, and I hope that's okay with you. I'm going to come back to that as a topic in just a little bit.
That's fine, Professor Friedman.
You know, when I started teaching, I was 24 years old, and I looked like I was about 18, and we were at a party, and one of the students who'd had too much to drink came up to me and said, "Why do we have to call you Professor Friedman?" And I said, "Well, you don't. I'm glad to say something about that in class tomorrow." And I came into class the next day, and I said, you know, Ms. Elliott, I still remember her and her name, came up to me, and so that might be a tip, not to go up to professors drunk and ask them questions like that. And I said, you know, she asked why
Especially not if David's around.
Yes, especially.
Hey, this is all off the record. Or you can tweet, though. Feel free to tweet.
Pay no attention to the cameras or the microphones.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It's not off the record. This is going to be posted on the NYU website. Sorry.
Where there's a huge viewership,
Yeah.
thousands of people, I'm sure.
That reminds me, I have something to say about the law review contest, but I'll mention that later.
Okay. So anyway, so I came into class the next day, and I said, you know, Miss Elliott asked if she has to call me Professor Friedman, and the answer is no. Anybody in the room should feel free to call me Mr. Friedman or Sir. So feel free. So, you know, I want to throw the same question at you, but I just want to observe the obvious, which is it's not an accident that ambitious people might not be happy people. I mean, the nature of ambition is that you're always striving. And if you're always striving, maybe it's hard to be at peace. So is it impossible?
No, I think it's neither necessary nor sufficient for happiness. I think David's right that there's ambiguity in ambition. I don't have the answer to this, and anyone who tells you they do, you should discount. But I tend to think that sort of comfortableness in your own skin is sort of creating and defining your own sense of achievement at the end of the day leads to happiness. And I think part of the struggle in the book and the tension that David describes is part of that. We have notions of ambition, maybe in part from our upbringing and what we were told was success, maybe our own sense of making up for other failings and the like, which is David mentions in the book as well. And so we get ideas of ambition and then of success and ambition, and we strive for them. But I think at the end of the day, you're defining your own terms. It's not necessarily about achieving this position or achieving that position, but you do have to be ambitious, I think, in your own success, your own sense of success in, I want to do good at this job. I want to be perceived as someone with integrity. I want to be able to support my family. I want to do well in ways that matter to you. And there are, of course, external factors that come into play. No one's an island of self-fulfillment. But I think it changes over the course of a life and a career. And I think what you have to look for at the end of the day is that sense of what's driving you in what you're doing, to be good at what you're doing, and balanced and happy in what you're doing. And it's a bit circular, I gather, I admit. But, I think, if I may tell a personal story, the idea of the improbability, I I didn't grow up with some sense of I must achieve this and that. I was the first lawyer in my family. I went to law school because it seemed like a good thing to do, and as it turned out, I did well. It made sense in my way of thinking. I went to Cornell. I did well there, I got the clerkship with Judge Fletcher on the Ninth Circuit. I was interviewed by this rather smart young clerk then. What was his name? Trevor Morrison, right? Trevor Morrison interviewed me to clerk for Judge Fletcher and liked me and tells a made-up story about how he pushed my resume to the judge. But I clerked for Judge. I had the clerkship for Judge Fletcher, and I was at Cornell and editor of the Law Review, and I got a call one day from a Seventh Circuit judge named Judge Kenneth Ripple. And he was calling because another editor on the Law Review had applied to clerk for him. And so Judge Ripple's sort of sneaky, strategic way of figuring out if this is a good person was not just to call recommenders, but to call someone, a colleague of the applicant. And so he looked up who the editor-in-chief of the Law Review was, and he called me, and we chatted about the editor, who I thought was great. And as we were talking on the phone, he said, so, what are you doing after law school? And I said, I'm going to clerk for Betty Fletcher on the Ninth Circuit. He said, that's great. She's a great judge. It's a wonderful clerkship. And what are you going to do after that? And I said, I have no idea what I'm going to do after that. And he said, well, you're going to apply to the clerk on the Supreme Court, right? And I said, I don't know, maybe. I never thought of it before. And he said, well, you should. You absolutely should. You've got a great clerkship, and you are editor-in-chief of the Cornell Law Review. You should apply to the clerkship. And no one had suggested that to me before, Judge Ripple, but he encouraged me, and he said, you never know. You got to put yourself in the game. More people apply to me on the Seventh Circuit than to the Supreme Court, so go ahead and try. So I went and talked to professors who were equally encouraging at that point. But I think of myself in that sense as improbable. It hadn't been an ambition. Doing well in law school, getting a clerkship had become an ambition since suddenly getting the clerkship. And so I didn't live in the world where if I had not gotten a Supreme Court clerkship, somehow that was a failing, or I was succeeding, and I tried for something that I didn't know I would get, and I put my hat in the ring like Judge Ripple told me to do, and I succeeded. So it had a sort of improbability, and these things I think have a way of not being totally plannable. But I do know that I was enjoying what I was doing. I was loving law school. I was engaged with what I was doing, and that ultimately led to that kind of success. And so there's a sort of improbability to that, which I think, which isn't, so at base, was I ambitious then? Absolutely. But did I have some driving ambition, some clear sense of what had to be in order for me to reach a level of happiness? No. And I think that sort of mindset has served me well.
Well, that's fascinating. You owe Judge Ripple big time.
I do. And if we have time, there's someone else in the story of getting the clerkship who I'll come back to when we have time.
Okay. So, well, it's actually interesting just to listen to that story. I didn't
know that. That's
I didn't even know a lawyer when I went to law school. And, the one thing I will
Because you
say-
only knew law professors.
I knew, Anyway, I too grew up in a middle-class sort of neighborhood, and there just weren't lawyers about. But the one thing I guess that's been a life lesson for me, and that I think is important when you think about, your careers in the law, and it struck me about the book, because I'm going to ask a little bit more of an edgier question about it, is to manage to be ambitious, but also to notice what you've accomplished, and to not lose sight of
Right.
it. And I certainly felt, and I'm sure the two of you have, at moments in your career where you thought, I'd have never guessed this is the world that I would be living in, and to appreciate those moments when they happen, even if there's something else you want. But the one thing that did strike me about the book was people were extremely and this is why I found the question of ambition ambiguous. People were extremely personally ambitious, and I found them by and large, especially some of the leading characters, to be less ambitious about the work. So there's another kind of ambition, right? I mean, you can be ambitious about a goal equally as your own self-promotion, you could think, I want this policy to succeed, and I just didn't know if you wanted to, you seem to focus very much on the personal ambition part of it.
Well, I think that's a great point that is also explored in the book. One distinction I would draw, and this is something from my own experience, is, and it's explored through some of the characters. Some of us, and I would say I was one of these when I was a lawyer, are into law almost as a kind of, as a marker of prestige. Can we be good at the law? Can we be good at law school exams? Can we be good at amassing the hallmarks of what is a successful career in the law, almost to kind of make ourselves feel better or fill some kind of void? And then the second school I would sort of compare that to is people who love the law for its own sake, people who find it interesting, people who find it rewarding, people who find projects within the law, whether they're academic or pro bono or commercial, that they feel have some intrinsic merit. And I think that Audrey and perhaps Judge Stinson, kind of like me, because those characters, to be honest, are based a little bit on me, I think they fall into that first gap. They are good at the law, they are smart, but they're very much pursuing it in a very personal way, perhaps for their own personal aggrandizement or glory. And then there are other characters, like the character of Harvetta, who are probably more into the law qua the law. Which of those is better? I don't know. Probably many people would tell you the latter, but I don't know. It's something that's worth considering. But it's also worth asking yourself, what type of person am I? And it's not binary. You might feel like the first part mainly, but then have these moments where you find a project that gets you excited, that puts you in the second camp. But that is definitely a distinction I would acknowledge, yeah.
So I just want to talk about a particular kind of job ambition for a little bit. And I'm going to start with another quote. So, a Supreme Court clerkship is not just another job, Harvey. I said, this is Audrey speaking, trying to regain my composure. It's immortality. It's acceptance. So, what does one ask? I guess I have two questions. One of them takes the form of, come on. And the other is, it's sort of interesting that acceptance, it's immortality, it's acceptance. Like, immortality is one thing, but what you really need to be is accepted. So, actually, you're the only person up here who clerked for the Supreme Court. I wanted to. It's actually, I would have to say, maybe the one thing in my career I was really disappointed to not get to do, though. Well, I'm going to save that, though, because it's a point I want to make. But you did. Did you want to clerk on the court?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Hell, if any justices are hiring right now, call me.
Is that why this book was written? So I had
I mean, I kind of describe the book as like a gunner's fever dream. Like, it is a little bit like that. But anyway, sorry. You were about to ask Judge Nathan a question.
Yeah, well, I was going to ask her whether she's either accepted or immortal at this point in her life.
I've accepted my immortality.
Oh, you have life tenure. It's pretty close.
That's true.
Was it life-changing? Was it?
I mean, there's lots of things are life-changing. I'll come to the Supreme Court clerkship.
Having children and clerking on the Supreme
Having
Court.
children. I met my spouse, Professor Meg Satterthwaite, clerking not on the Supreme Court, but on the Ninth Circuit. So clerking was life-changing in that sense. And then we have kids, so therefore, as a result of clerking.
I noticed that there's a causal effect between clerking and having children.
Yeah. When Meg and I were getting together, and Meg was on the market actually, and she made a comment at one point about how I'm not a Supreme Court clerkship. So, and I said something like, "Oh, Supreme Court clerks are a dime a dozen," which is absurd and hilarious. So we started calling Supreme Court clerks A-dads, a dime a dozen, and I think in the way that David does, it both puts you on the pedestal and then laughs at you at your absurdity. There is no difference between the people who get the Supreme Court clerkships and the people who don't, except that they got the Supreme Court clerkships, right? There are hundreds or thousands of people every year applying to the justices who would be just as good and will and do go on to do just as good things in their career. But it is a uniquely, the reality is it's a unique It is a unique marker of achievement and success in the law that signifies things to people, and sometimes it wrongly signifies, right? True or not, let's take a fictionalized example of someone who gets their circuit clerkship because of familial connection to the judge, and then the suggestion is that person is going to go on to get a Supreme Court clerkship. I think that can happen. And so, that credential for that person may get them in the door, but if they can't write and they can't think and they can't research law, it's only going to get them so far. But I'd be lying if I didn't say it is a uniquely beneficial credential and a uniquely exceptional experience. I mean, we come to law school and we sort of worship at the altar of the Supreme Court, and then suddenly straight out of law school to get to be there working with a justice and seeing the process of the court is a phenomenal experience. So yes and no, and immortality, no.
Well, time will tell. So,
Yeah, but you won't know.
unless we both get lucky. This leads me to want to go in two directions at one time, and they're somewhat conflicted, but I'll stir them up and see if we can go. So one is, one more paragraph. This is the longest paragraph I'll read you. So there's a moment at which one of the characters looks to not be getting a Supreme Court clerkship and says, so in one sense, not getting a Supreme Court clerkship was a great blessing. It gave me freedom to step off the track, freedom to just be. Dropping out of the race gave me such sweet relief. I look forward to watching others pass me, sweating and panting and struggling mightily. For what? As I just stood there, breathing deeply and savoring the sky above me and the ground below. And I just want to highlight it because, ironically, I was very honest with everybody. The one thing in my career that I think I really wanted to do that I didn't get to do was clerk on the court. And the one thing I'm confident of is that would not be who I am if I had clerked on the court. I would never have written the will of the people, because people who clerk on the court tend not to be critics of the court in the way that I was. And so I find that that one of the problems with ambition in the law is that it's often focused in a very unidirectional way. And yet when I talk about people in their careers and in their experiences, it's often people that tumbled off that single beam for whatever reason that end up happiest, that had to go in unexpected directions to follow, your own story about clerking on the Supreme Court, that so much of what happens is luck, and ultimately that luck or misfortune either takes you in directions that matter a great deal. So discuss.
Well, I totally agree with that, and I think luck, and this is what I was trying to say at some level about ambition, which is you can't just say, well, this is what I want to do, and here's my linear path to get there. I think at any level with respect to careers, I think you have to figure out in the course of your career what excites you, what you're good at, what fits with your sort of composition as a human being. And what I say to my clerks and students, it is a multi-pointed path. It's not linear. But when you go into a position, and it could be anything. It could be clerking. It could be at a public interest organization. It could be at a law firm. I think if you try to become part of the institution, and I'm an institutionalist, so I'm not, so take it with a grain of salt if you're not, and not everybody is. But I think if you go into the institution, try to become a part of it. Maybe it's not perfect. Try to change it. But give it your all, right? Rather, I think you sometimes see people go in with a level of cynicism and dismissiveness, a sort of I'm here because I have to be, and I'm angry about that, and I think that's no good. I think what you do is you go in, you do your best, see what you can learn, what you can give to the institution, the place where you're working, get the most out of it, and see where it takes you, because in the course of that you will meet people, you will learn things that will set you on a whole other set of options and paths, hopefully. And I think at the end of the day, that's how we end up both where we are and happy in our existence, not because we plotted some perfect career path, but because we figured out what works for us in the course of trying different things and succeeding in our own ways within them.
So, by the way, I want to let everybody know, usually we have a conversation, then we start to pass the mics around, and I'm actually thinking of switching that up a little bit in the sense that in a moment I'm going to see if there are any questions and take some and then return back because I really want to zigzag in terms of the things we talk about. But, so you, my friend, you are obsessed with clerkships. It is just obvious throughout your career.
You said that in the past tense.
Still am.
No, I'm waiting for the sequel, but I'm not sure what that will be. And Michelle Sharandy would be very unhappy with me if there wasn't some plug for clerkships here, and so then I would be not getting my little stipend. But so, clerkships, discuss. I mean,
Well, I think you can tell from what Judge Nathan was mentioning and also the book, it is really a wonderful experience. Credential value aside, I think it is just a tremendous experience. Some of my best friends in the world are the 3 folks I met clerking. As you know from Judge Nathan, she found true love through clerking. That's certainly a benefit. I think, I'm not, that's not so
they're
clinical,
married.
a benefit.
She didn't say true love. I heard her say that.
So I think that, and it's just an amazing experience to be able to see the litigation process from that side of the bench. And even, I was chatting the other day with the chief talent officer of a large law firm, and she was saying that even for people who go to the transactional side, it can be beneficial in terms of the writing and the reasoning, and also even just the maturity level and learning about how a workplace functions in a perhaps more intimate environment before you're thrown into the maw of big law, so to speak. So I think there are so many benefits. I really am a clerkship evangelist, and you guys are very privileged being at a place like NYU, which has a tremendous track record at sending people into clerkships. I speak at law schools sort of all over the US News hierarchy, what have you, and I always feel, I guess this is on the web, but I always feel a little bit bad when I speak at law schools where in the whole year there might be, half a dozen people who clerk. It's almost like I'm talking about what it's like to be on a yacht eating grapes or something. Whereas you guys, this is a very attainable option for all of you pretty much. So I can't say enough good stuff about it.
So I am going to ask if
Can
there
I
are any...
say something about clerking?
Apply to Judge Nathan.
I won't repeat what David said, but I do agree, and I think you come out of law school and it makes real in a way a lot of the things that you've been studying. Now, maybe some of you do externships or clinics, and so you have a sense of that. But I think, I used to teach civil procedure, but to come out of civil procedure and suddenly sort of physically see a complaint being filed, a discovery dispute being resolved, a jury being selected, it makes it real such that when you go out and lawyer, you've seen it. And watch one, do one, teach one is something to live by, says my brother, the neurosurgeon. But so in addition to that, you see how a decision maker is influenced, what works, what doesn't work. You see lawyering of every level, both written and oral advocacy, and that's an incredible experience. You make a mentorship and connection with a judge, and I think it's a uniquely human and moving relationship to have with this person who will be, who you're intertwined with. I mean, the judge's reputation depends on her clerks, the clerk's reputation depends on her judges. You live with each other for a year, and in that time, people get married, relatives die, career, big things happen. Like, it's an intense experience. And so with the judge, that unique mentorship happens, as does the connection with your co-clerks, who most people say are just incredibly important lifelong friendships and colleagues, and other, the sort of extended clerk family of other clerks for that judge and other clerks in the courthouse at that time. And it's just, and all of that separate from the fact that you're reading lots of different areas of law, you're studying researching lots of different areas of law, and importantly, you're writing. Right? That's what lawyers do, is they write. And so suddenly here you are just having to produce. You're writing memos and drafts and the like to your judge, who's a federal judge, and you're doing it and you're producing it, and writing begets writing. So the more you do it, the better you'll be at it. So I went to a talk like this, and somebody said, when I was in law school, it said you should clerk because you get out of law school and it's the best job you'll ever have, which is it's kind of true. I think that it's true in a lot of ways, but it is an incredible experience, and my only regret in life is that I didn't clerk for a district judge, so you should apply.
So I'm actually going to ask for questions in 20 seconds, and then we're going to pivot to love. So that's why I want to kind of do careers and then move to love. But I just want to point out, because I heard Judge Nathan say, and you're clerking for a federal judge. There are actually judges who have interesting jobs who are not federal judges, and in fact, the states. So one of the characters in the book is clerking for. I was going to say Goodwin Liu, but I won't. Sherwin Lin, and state Supreme Courts, it turns out, make a lot of law in a lot of areas, and so those are great. And there are lots of different trial judges, and so I think what
magistrate judges,
magistrate, bankruptcy judges.
I mean, right.
Yeah.
So what David says is true, which is that there are attainable clerkships for pretty much everyone all along the way. Anybody have kind of career, life, ambition questions before we move to more juicy and salacious, or sad and pathetic things? I'm not sure which. Yes.
Hi.
Who are you?
I'm Betsy Feuerstein. I'm a 1L. I think it's really interesting that it seems like your two main characters are women and your initial persona online was a woman. And I was having a conversation with a friend last night about how it seems already as a 1L, it seems like a woman's perspective or experience of law school is quite different from that of a man's, including in terms of what we're ambitious about and the pressures that we feel. And I wondered if you could comment on that, and Judge Nathan, if you could also comment as well.
Wow, well, thanks for reading the book, Betsy. I really appreciate it. I try to often when I give talks, it's kind of like going to class as a 3L. You don't need to have done the reading. But I always am grateful.
That's not true.
I'm always grateful when people have. For me, it's very interesting. I don't know, I think when I first started writing Underneath Their Robes, which was the sort of Gossip Girl style blog I did before Above the Law, I initially adopted a female persona merely to cover my tracks. Well, I'm a guy, I'll make her a woman. I'm a federal prosecutor, I'll pretend she works in a law firm. I'm on the East Coast, I'll give the Post's West Coast timestamps. It was really just subterfuge. But as I started to get more and more into it, I started to really enjoy the persona. Now, not to say I'm very happy with my current gender identity, but I've always been kind of fascinated by how our perspective, whether it's gender or our racial or ethnic background, or, well, I'm 5'6", like our height, how that literally affects the way you perceive the world. And I think it's also a really good exercise in empathy. So when I did Underneath Their Robes, that female persona was a bit ridiculous, I will admit. And Judge Richard Posner, who's actually a blurber for Supreme Ambitions, he was an avid reader of Underneath Their Robes, but he was one of the first people who was onto the fact that Article III groupie was no woman. And so the ABA Journal asked him, Judge Posner, what makes you think Article III groupie is not a woman as she purports to be? And he said, no professional woman I know talks like this. Because as Jeffrey Toobin described her in the New Yorker, she was this boozy debutante. She was obsessed with celebrities and shoes and Article III judges. So it was a bit of a caricature. So when I set out to write Supreme Ambitions, I thought, I wanted to write from a woman's perspective, but more realistically. Some of my early readers were women who would give me notes on the manuscript, and I wanted to kind of set myself a higher challenge, not to write something that was humorous and over the top, but something that was a little more realistic. And I'm glad to say that of the reviewers, many of whom have been women, I haven't had too many complaints about the book not adequately reflecting their experiences. But I put "their" in quotes because, again, every woman's experience is different, everyone's experience of this profession is different and unique. Your mileage may vary. So, Judge Nathan.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think it's an interesting question, and no one's experiences are the same. I do think in my sense of my time in law school and my sense of who is being pushed to me for clerkships and things like that, that there is a kind of level of self-promotion and confidence that I think we're more likely to see in men than in women. And I put my own self in the category when I was in law school. I constantly felt self-conscious about speaking in class and had concerns about that. And pretty confident, and that confidence gains with, that confidence grew with measures of success. But if you don't speak in class, then the professor doesn't know who you are, or if you're afraid to go to office hours and the professor doesn't know who you are, when it comes time for clerkships or other letters of recommendation, there are disparities. And I see it. I get calls from law professors all of the time, and I haven't done the statistical analysis, but it's more about male applicants than women applicants. And I think, which isn't to say there's, that's sexism, it's just that these are the people who are putting themselves in front of their professors in ways that allows their professors to champion for them. And it's a problem because it does continue these kinds of disparities. And I don't know what the solution is. I mean, what I can say is, for me, the personality of a perfect clerk is someone who has sort of confidence and humility and equipoise. And the more I see that, the more I'm likely to hire them, because I think you need both of those things to do the job well. But even as people are successful, and this is true for men and women, I think with a sense of humility, that feeling of petting the imposter monster under the desk, like at any moment I'm going to be exposed as someone who doesn't deserve these things that I seem to have achieved, and that's not a I don't know. I mean, at some level it's healthy because it keeps us in check. It causes us to examine, what we're doing and why we're doing it, and the like, and keep a sense of humility. On the other hand, you have to be brave, and you have to put yourself out there and put yourself in the game for things, and that could be hard.
Yeah. So this leads me to actually ask a question that I warned David I was going to ask, because it's a pointed question, and so I feel one should have fair warning, which is. And by the way, I just want to highlight something you just said, Allie, which is I still, my age, and it's getting up there, have moments where something's happening and I'm just waiting for the adult to wander into the room to make a decision, and then I realize I'm the adult in the room and I have to make a decision. So I think that sticks with you.
You should put on a black robe and see what happens.
We're going to get to that question next. So I don't. We're living in an odd space and time in the world, and particularly in academic institutions. We are all about safe spaces and care about our gender roles and racial roles, and there is a ton to applaud in that in the world that we live in. And on the other hand, this book is just popping with stereotypes. It's popping with stereotypes, anti-stereotypes. I could not say half the things that are in this book, and I don't know how to feel about that. I grew up in a very multi-ethnic space in which we dealt with difference by pointing it out in barbed ways all the time. That's just how we coexisted, and whether it was good or bad, it certainly wouldn't pass muster today. But so I just, speak to that, because you had license and took it.
Yeah, so it's interesting. This has definitely been one of the more controversial issues about the book. Some of the characters do, on the surface, resemble stereotypes in a lot of ways. I guess I have a 3-point response. Point one, what I was trying to do in the book was take stereotypes and either subvert them or tweak them. So take, for example, the character of Harvetta, who is Audrey's friend clerking for a state court judge. When Audrey meets her, Harvetta strikes her in some ways as perhaps very stereotypical. She's this large and in-charge African-American woman. She has a very salty mouth. And Audrey self-awarely wonders to herself, is Harvetta going to be my new, and this is capitalized, sassy African-American friend? She kind of thinks in a way where she's perceiving Harvetta as almost a stereotype. But then the more she learns about Harvetta, she realizes Harvetta is very, very different. Harvetta, for example, is a huge, huge legal nerd who reads the Stanford Law Review by the pool for fun, which is not a stereotype. So I think that in some ways I was trying to, as Professor Friedman was saying, acknowledge the stereotype and then change it or poke a hole in it or do something with it. The second thing I would say, I guess, is, and again, I think that, I don't know if this is politically incorrect. Sometimes on Above the Law, we're not politically correct.
Really?
And I think that's one thing people appreciate about us, in the sense that the legal profession is very much about decorum and etiquette and not acknowledging the elephant in the room. And a lot of times we'll be the ones who will say, well, it looks kind of like an elephant. So I guess what I would say as my second point is, there is such a thing as people who do resemble stereotypes. I am a gay man, I really love Broadway show tunes, I try to go to the gym a lot, and I want someone to recognize my existence too. I don't want to be precluded from being in a book or movie because I'm too stereotypical. I'm just me, and I don't know why, if it's nature or nurture or genetics or what have you, or whether stereotypes are self-reinforcing, I don't know, but I am all of these things. I hate sports. There are other ways in which I am probably different from many gay men, and here's the thing I wanted to mention about Law Review before I forget. Law Review Video Contest, Above Law, great feature. NYU routinely kicks butt at it. I hope you guys submit. Here's I can't speak for the other members of the judging panel, but as a gay man, I love Beyonce. And this new video for Formation is amazing. And it is a very difficult song musically, and it is very difficult to dance to. Just watch what she does in her Super Bowl performance. But if someone at NYU can make a kick-butt video for this Formation, oh, you have my vote. So anyway, when I saw that amazing, beautiful image that Nina Totenberg tweeted of the Scalia clerks all in black suits arrayed on the Supreme Court steps, I immediately thought, this is like Beyonce. Come on, law clerks, let's get in formation. So anyway, where was I?
I don't know. I was just going to say, I'm interrupting you. In fact, I'm going to keep things crisp for everybody.
So anyway, and the third point about stereotypes is I'm not the only writer to do this. Take a look at, for example, the writing of Tom Wolfe. I think we depict life as it is, and sometimes there are these tribalist things that look like stereotypes but are actually just lived reality. So anyway, that's my 3-point response.
Other questions? I'm going to keep going if somebody doesn't raise
Oh,
their hand.
come on, don't be shy. Betsy took one for the team. Come on. Oh, there, we have one in the...
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Tristan Edwards. I'm a 2L. Thank you both for coming. Judge Nathan, this is a question for you. I just wanted to ask you a little bit about something you said earlier. You were talking about how you're an institutionalist and that as an institutionalist you need to take it seriously and do what you can to change it. And I'm kind of curious as to what you would change if you could and how you kind of see yourself as an actor of change.
Interesting question. I don't know that I see myself now as a judge as an actor of change. To be perfectly honest, I
You
think
just state the law as it is. You never make any of it.
And should be great on the Second Circuit.
who are they? It'll sound so. Let me answer partly. I think I was reflecting more on my career in general. So going to a law firm, doing the work of a law firm, advocating. I mean, just as an example, when I did well in law school, and I was doing interviews as a 1L, I guess, for the summer after 1L year, and this is in the late 90s, so it's a different time, and one of the things that comes from doing well is that you get multiple offers, right? Which was a nice privilege and benefit. And I had offers from a couple of firms that I went to, and I asked them if they had spousal benefits for same-sex partners. And every single one of these big law firms did not. But a number of them, said, well, we'll look into it, and actively did. And just in the course of trying to recruit me, I affected some change. And I think too, in other jobs, as a practicing lawyer, I worked in the White House counsel's office. I worked in the New York Attorney General's office, and in different ways tried to make institutions, small and large ways, better by advocating for changes that mattered to me and that felt significant. But I'm not, and I think social change in the world happens in multifaceted ways. I think you need people inside institutions working change sort of systematically within the system without fighting against it. I think you need pressures from the outside pushing in. You need historians, you need press, you need all kinds of things to affect a kind of change. And I just always saw myself as somebody sort of working within a system and not and not someone sort of advocating as much from without. And it's interesting as a judge, and Barry will laugh at me, but I'll tell you, when you sit on the bench and in the middle of a trial, and somebody says objection, and you have 3 seconds to give your ruling, you do kind of feel like an umpire calling balls and strikes. I mean, or at least a basketball ref saying if there's a foul, right? And maybe there's more genuine discretion in that. I don't know. But it's not a job. It is a passive job in some ways. You get the cases that come in front of you. You do have to decide those cases. I was gearing up for a big trial that was about to start. I was looking forward to it. There were incredibly interesting issues, and the defendant decided to plead guilty. And that's part of the system. That's what happens. I have no say in that. I have no ability on most days, on a day-to-day basis, to decide what I'm working on or what I'm going to do or how what I do has an effect in the world. And that's a peculiar thing about being a judge. But I do think the sort of broader point for me, when I think about having been a law clerk, working at a law firm, working in government at state and federal level, I wanted to become part of that institution. I wanted to work at it, to be good in it. Sometimes that meant seeking change, sometimes it didn't. But that's sort of the story of what mattered for me as success in any particular position I held in my career.
Are there other questions? So I'm going to pivot then. So, I read you a quote earlier.
Speaking of basketball.
I'm sorry.
Speaking of
basketball. Well, I actually couldn't decide whether to pivot toward some concerns I have about federal judges or this topic, but I think I'll go with this topic. So this is a quote I read you earlier, but I cheated. So I'm going to read you the full quote now. "You're an improbable person, Audrey, but so am I." David knows where this is going. "We have that in common, along with difficulty in loving or being loved, and ambition, insatiable ambition." So, I just want to pry open the topic of, one could also read the book and think that there's an inverse relationship between ambition and love, or ambition and success at law. I feel I could talk about this now because Meg's left the room, and so we're all safe now. But so I'm just curious whether, and it's, we all know, we've all lived in this legal world, and people work long hours and have complicated relationships, and sometimes they have them at work where it's not as one of your characters advises, and others not always the best. So I'm just, what about love and the law?
Yeah, so this book, I have to confess, was very therapeutic for me as I was writing it, because I felt like I was working through a lot of issues that I had myself. So I graduated law school in the late 90s, and this was a very different time for LGBT individuals. I was in law school when DOMA was passed. This was years before marriage equality. And so I think for me, I kind of had a sort of, to be honest, a sort of emotionally stunted development. I wasn't going to act on my attraction to guys, but at the same time, I wasn't really good at faking it in terms of pretending to be straight, as you can probably tell. So I directed all of my energy into my career. And I don't think I'm alone, and I don't think it's uniquely an LGBT thing either. I think there are a lot of smart people. Maybe we were made fun of as kids, maybe we were nerds, what have you, and we kind of sublimate all of this energy and we just pour it into our careers, into our academics, into our jobs. And we kind of neglect this other side of us, whether it's, you'd call it personal life, romance, what have you. And so Audrey's a little bit like that. And so there's very little sex, not to diminish my sales, there's very little sex in this book.
It will increase your sales among federal judges.
Part of it also was I was not going to attempt to write a sex scene. I was like, I don't have the writing chops for that. Maybe someday.
You have some close, there's some teasing in the book.
There is.
So,
There's a little. It's not totally devoid, but this is not, 50 Suits of Grey. There's no, Judge Stinson has no Red Room of Pain. So, I don't know. Maybe that's something that people can relate to. Now, I will say, I think NYU, I'm pandering to you guys, but forgive me. I think you guys are much better at maintaining a more integrated self than people at other similarly elite law schools, including maybe some people uptown. But anyway, maybe that's all I would say on that.
Well, while you're on the subject, though, do you want to say a word about our attire? This seems
I feel like NYU, you guys are kind of rocking the village hipster kind of thing. Yeah, and you actually, I see some suits here, maybe some people in interviews later, but yeah.
Plus,
so,
we can always throw on the black uniform and we're
yeah,
good.
exactly.
Did you want to speak to love? Because
What's
otherwise-
love got to do with it?
Anybody have questions about love and the law? Nope. Well, don't say because now it's federal judges. So, it's interesting. There's this, I mean, I guess this comes with the turf of being obsessed about clerkship. Why obsessed about clerkships? I guess it's because you're obsessed with judges. And, the characters in the book have this sycophantic sort of relationship to the judges. And I remember being a clerk and going through all that. And I remember, and I've lived a life in the law. But I have to confess, I've started to worry. And it's because there's something, so there's one short quote here where she says, I shook her, this is when she meets the judge, she says, I shook her hand and chuckled at her quip. The one thing I remembered from trial practice class was always to laugh at a judicial joke or anything resembling one. And I'm sure you feel that sometimes on
No,
the
I'm
bench.
just funny.
We're all faking it.
No, that was genuinely funny, actually.
So, I think that there is, my concern is an obvious one, but I think that the job requires a certain aloofness.
Right.
You sit up on a bench, you wear a black robe, and you hold the fate of people and their lives in your hands. And yet, sitting on a bench, wearing a black robe, and being aloof can create arrogance and can create a certainty that you're right, which you perhaps need to do the job. And so I feel this deep tension about judging, and the more senior in the law that I get, the more I feel it. And so now that we're all mic'd up and on television here, sort of.
Well, I think you've put your finger on, in part, where it comes from, and I guess the it is what an over lionizing of judges or an over fetishizing of their judgeness. And the law as an institution requires us, empowers individual people to be decision makers, and we have symbols because we don't have armies. We have the marble, and we have benches, and we have black robes as symbols of authority and neutrality. And it turns out that underneath those robes are human beings. But I think the law does require a certain aloofness, a certain separation of judges at some level from the practice of law, right? And so we take judges from the practice of law and we put them on the bench as decision makers, and we need to have symbols of neutrality and authority as components of the rule of law. I think that's true. On the other hand, we are people. Judges are people, and one of the things I learned clerking was the humanity of judges, of the people that I clerked for, who were, who I got to know as individuals, and that for me brought a certain humanity to judges that I didn't appreciate as a law student. And I do think it is the task of judges to find a way both to maintain the decorum and integrity appropriate, but not to be so far removed as to not be a part of the world in which we are judging. And there are lots of debates about this in terms of appropriateness of judges participating in seminars or reading legal blogs, or what kind of writing is appropriate. I think there has to be a balance that allows judges both to earn and have the respect that's required in the following of our rulings in that component of the rule of law, but also being part of the world in which we live and being part of and being known as human beings, which we are. And I do think, I mean, look, there's no doubt that you put people in these positions with this authority and you separate them from the world, and they might lack a kind of humility that I think actually is a necessary component of judging. And so, what's the right? I think it's right to worry, and to push back. And I think David. I think the work that David does this in a way, right? He both, I mean, it is this weird sort of inversion and playing with the idea of judges as he holds them in this esteem. At the same time, he's exposing them and making fun of them. And it's I won't say it's universally a good thing, but I think it is a component of transparency that is vitally important to keeping lots of institutions in check, including the judiciary.
So I want to see if there are any.
And
other-
and it happens with law professors too, right?
Yeah, that's true. Absolutely.
David, does it?
Yeah.
I'm just really, really smart. So I
But
want to
not
see
as funny. As
yep, there's a question.
My name is Cedra Zadie, and I'm a 1L. And I have a question that I think touches on all three of the topics we've talked about. So I guess I'm asking what your thoughts are on lawyers and going to law school and the death of creativity and sort of the stereotype that lawyers are not creative or robots. And one thing I've noticed, like anecdotally, is a lot of people in the legal field who seem to be the happiest are, as Professor Friedman mentioned, those who check their ambition, but also people who are married to artists. And so I'm wondering, like, what your thoughts are on that.
Life tip, marry an artist.
Yeah, like our contracts professor was married to a writer, and he talked about this in class. So so I guess just like, do you have any first, do you take this assumption to be true that lawyers are, our creativity kind of slowly dies? And if so, like, what's the best way to check that? Is it a check on ambition? Is it to choose a creative partner or to start a blog? Like, what are your thoughts?
Before you guys answer, I'm going to let these be each of yours last words, and then I'm going to say who won the book. So
Oh, yeah.
I'm going to let David have the last word.
Yeah, well, and I think this is a great question for David. I think because he's made such a uniquely interesting career out of his creativity. It's true that there's a certain formalism in the law that I think suppresses creativity. But I think there are ways of expressing oneself even within that. I mean, there is, this is going to sound a little pathetic, but when I read a beautiful brief, there's creativity in that, and
hope.
and hope, and all of these things. And so, yeah, I think, even just in the formalistic process of brief writing, you can find aspects of creativity. But then I think one does have to look beyond the law in ways, and it can be writing or socializing with friends in different ways, and and marrying artists. I'm glad, which I'll do now that Meg's gone. But I'm going to turn it just to a slightly different point, and then let David really answer the question. I do think I am someone who advocates generally for getting out as a social matter, like breaking outside of our circles a little bit, and having married someone who clerked for the same judge as an exception to this. But I do think having friends and meeting people who are not just lawyers, I think socializing with people who have totally different ideological views from you and is really important. I think it makes us fuller human beings. I think sometimes we can get isolated in our own sort of professional and ideological silos, and I would encourage all of you, for your betterment of yourself, both as a lawyer and as a human in the world, to try to break through some of those boundaries and get out and meet people who are not just like you.
I agree with everything Judge Nathan just said. I would just add to that, and I think it's a great question. I do think that there is something about law which is based on precedent and formalism that can sometimes stunt creativity. So I would just urge anyone who does have these creative desires, and not everyone has to, and that's fine, but if you do, try to carve out some time, even when you are grinding out the hours at a firm, to have some kind of outlet, whether it is, oh, we profile these people sometimes on About the Law. I'm somebody who is a sculptor. I'm a mixed martial art person. I'm a novelist. Try to find some time where you can do that. For me, when I was at Wachtell, I had no free time, so that was kind of a problem. But when I moved to the U.S. Attorney's Office and I was doing appellate work where the deadlines were known and the schedule was better, that's when I was able to start this blog underneath their robes. And so try to carve out some time, whether it's an hour or two before you go to bed, whether it's the weekend, to have some other outlet. I think your time is really all you have, and so you have to make the best use of it. Even writing this book was challenging because I have a day job now that's pretty time consuming. I did a lot of it on the weekends, and so you just have to figure out that time. And one tip I would give you is put it in your appointment book as an appointment. So if somebody says, hey, do you want to do this? Or someone has something that's kind of optional, but you're kind of on the fence about it. You say, well, actually, no, I have an appointment, even if that's just an appointment to go to your sculpture studio. So anyway, I do think that there are ways to balance creativity and the life in the law, and I wish you all the best of luck with your lives and careers in the law.
I represent mixed martial artists. Does that count as creativity? So, I have to say one quick word, which is I find even within the structures of the law, there's room for extraordinary creativity. And in fact, one of the things that makes me crazy is the failure to recognize that and to think that it's all got to be in this kind of formal way when, brilliant lawyers that I've watched actually managed to crack that completely. So I'm going to tell you who won books. And so this book is full of stereotypes, and there's just and what's great about this institution is how unbelievably diverse we are, and you're going to notice that as I read the winners. And I'm teaching the most diverse criminal procedure class I've ever taught in 30 years of teaching, and it makes me so relentlessly happy every single time that I walk into class. So the winners are, I'm just going to go down the list. Where are the books, Michael, so that they're over there, and David will sign them. Eric Petrie, Christopher Rydberg, Sophia Suarez, Natasha Goss, Sukwa Kai, Rupinder Garcha, Kevin Benish, Manuel Ayera, Kyle Chow, and Nani Anyakweli. Go get your books. David, thank you.
Congratulations.
Ali, thank you.